My name is Ben Busboom. I'm an attorney with Husch Blackwell. My practice focuses on energy and environment, and I get the privilege today to introduce and talk to Mark Yates. Mark is a principal at Cornerstone. Mark is from Oklahoma. Yeah, it's no booze. See, we talked about it. It's his first win in solar conference, and he's enjoying his time in Nebraska, so we'll try to keep it that way. Mark focuses on public policy, renewables, ag, and then prior to joining Cornerstone, Mark was the president with Advanced Power Alliance, also focusing on regional public strategy, public relations, and then prior to that, as any good Oklahoma guy is, he's an ag background, Oklahoma Farm Bureau. So today we're going to talk about some high-level topics when it comes to renewable energy because Lord knows we have a lot of detail to get into later in the conference. Mark?
I appreciate that introduction, and thank you, Ben, for the willingness to do this conversation. We did talk about PowerPoint. I will tell you, I started my career as an educator in Oklahoma. I spent 11 years in the high school setting, and I do recall several times where my students were like, "Coach, stop with the PowerPoints. We just like when you interact and talk to us." So hopefully we can make this engaging for you, and very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation to speak. I've heard for years how great this conference is, and it continues to grow. And really appreciate both Amanda Miller and also my colleague that I've worked with at Advanced Power Alliance, Rich Lombardi. Just does fabulous work here in Nebraska. And then he also told me, which I need to meet John. I've listened to John, but I need to meet John in person because I hear that he's given more wind speeches than anyone else in the state of Nebraska. And so we really appreciate his leadership and then everyone else involved in putting this together. Frankly, I'm on a lot of calls when it comes to renewables and development and looking at different states around the country. And Nebraska has a great reputation for being a business-friendly state, open for development, and you're on a great growth trajectory with both wind and the onset of solar and energy storage. So I'm really excited to be here today and discuss at a high level kind of what's going on around the country and what we can all look forward to. So thank you.
And can you guys hear me all right? There it is. All right. Well, I think to start the question then is, what is going on nationally right now? From a policy perspective, what do we know and what do we maybe not know?
It's a loaded question. So when it comes to politics, and I think it depends on which lens you come from. It was great to hear the mayor's words and opening remarks this morning, and we're talking about climate change, climate crisis, timelines, expectations of how do we advance clean energy technologies and deploy at a more rapid pace. And at the same time, from my background, I'm from Oklahoma. Heavy fossil fuel, oil and gas state has been for 100 plus years, and climate change is a dirty word. We don't use it when we advocate for wind or solar. We don't talk about climate change in Oklahoma. It's not very palatable politically. And so I think, at a high level, the politics in our country, like most things, there's a lot of polarization with energy, depending on which lens you're looking at it through and what we should be doing. I think that with the new administration, with President Biden, and obviously the Democrats controlling both the House and the Senate, there is some very ambitious goals for accelerating clean energy deployment across the country and meeting some of these goals that have been set forth to address the climate crisis. Big news, and one reason we didn't put together a PowerPoint because I knew as soon as I developed a PowerPoint something would change, and sure enough it did. So we finally got some movement on the infrastructure bill last week. For the better part of 3 months since August when the infrastructure bill had passed the Senate, it basically was held hostage as the Democrats the interplay between progressive and more the centrist moderate Democrats were talking about, well, look, we're not going to pass the infrastructure bill until we get Build Back Better and kind of the social spending package along with that. And so there's been a lot of behind closed doors, a lot of debate over the past 2 to 3 months, and we finally saw some movement. Why the movement was the election on Tuesday of last week with kind of the results in Virginia, maybe an impetus to move a little quicker, possibly, right? But nonetheless, you saw the progressive Democrats and the moderate Democrats come together with some intervention from President Biden to push together the infrastructure package across the finish line. Massive, $1.2 trillion in this package. And on the clean energy front, very exciting. There's a lot in it. A lot of money is going to be dispersed across the country that will accelerate some of the trends that we already see. We can dive into the details. I don't want to take over the microphone, so Ben, interject when you see it. But nonetheless, very exciting to see what came out of D.C. last week with the infrastructure bill. There will be ongoing debates over the course of the next 2 weeks. A part of that agreement was that the reconciliation, the Build Back Better plan, the social spending package, would be taken up and voted for on the week of November the 15th. Both Senate and the House are on recess this week. So there is an expectation now moving forward in the House that the additional spending package will be put up for a vote before Thanksgiving. We'll see. That's all speculation. And then, frankly, the process as it presents itself, even if you were to see an additional spending package come out of the House, it's got to go to the Senate. And then we've seen that both Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema really have a lot of sway right now when it comes to what's going to come out of the Senate. And so regardless of what comes out of the House, there is an expectation that that bill will change. The amounts in that bill will change, and then it would have to be kicked back to the House for approval. So with all of that said, the politics in D.C. are somewhat crazy, but we saw some consensus. It has been framed as bipartisan. At least a hint of bipartisanship. 13 House Republicans voted for the infrastructure bill, and then on the Senate side, there was, I believe, 19 senators that voted. So there is a hint of bipartisanship. But that's exciting, and we can jump into more as we get there. So.
No, absolutely. And for those people who know me in this room, they don't want to hear me talk. They want to hear you talk. So you're fine on that. And it sounds like we're moving forward, right? Things are moving forward. The market moves forward, which brings us to the next question. The golden days of siting are kind of behind us. We're all those perfect, easy sites have been developed, and now we're moving forward into more, call them interesting siting, interesting parts of development. You want to talk a little bit about, the challenges we face as this industry continues to grow and as siting becomes a little bit more of a, site control, site selection becomes more of a material component versus a cherry picking component, I suppose.
No doubt. And I will say, as an aside, to the infrastructure bill, there was a large component focused on transmission and the build out of transmission across the country. And you see it in Nebraska, you see it all across this corridor up and down from Texas to Canada. The idea that, look, the best sites when it comes to selection for a wind facility, for the most part, those sites have been chosen due to constraints and the lack of transmission. I mean, at the end of the day, you can deploy as many renewable assets as you want, but if you can't get that power to market, then it doesn't make any sense. And so the investment coming out of D.C., I think, will be helpful as we look to build additional transmission infrastructure across the country. That will help ease some of the strain that we see today. But much like, whether my home state of Oklahoma, we've got so much power being produced in the western half of the state where the wind is its strongest. We could produce more wind facilities. We could deploy more wind there. We could build solar facilities in western Oklahoma where the solar penetration rates are the highest, much like the beautiful map that we didn't see, but we know it's in your booklet. If you look at Nebraska, that southwest corridor, the best for solar. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the infrastructure to build that, you start to see developments move further and further east, where there might not be those constraints and where they can get that power to market. And so, yes, I do think it's becoming more challenging for developers across the country to find those best locations. And then hopefully this investment with transmission and additional infrastructure will ease some of that. But of course, there is some siting sensitivities as you move forward.
How about specifics as far as siting sensitivities are concerned? I mean, again, some of these larger projects, especially when you think about, wind, you could coexist on certain ag aspects, certain oil and gas aspects, other pieces. As we move forward, maybe into more solar heavy development, more of these, again, these conflicting interests, thoughts on A, things to look out for, and B, maybe how to I guess mitigate things that maybe you didn't see coming.
Yeah, there's a lot here. So a couple of things that come to mind, and I think John mentioned it early in his opening remarks. At the end of the day, these developments are taking place in rural areas of the country. And yes, absolutely, wind has coexisted and coexist well with ag. It really does. I think solar is going to be a different circumstance. But at the end of the day, for companies, states, local communities, it's a partnership. When a company comes in to build a wind facility or a solar facility, it is a partnership with that local community. It is a partnership with landowners. And you all have to be on the same page. And I think moving forward, more so than ever, companies will have to do a very good job of not only the upfront partnership, but also that lasting relationship for decades. Because, as we see this transition continue to take place, you're going to see more facilities, solar, wind, energy storage, and that partnership is critical when you're looking to site these projects. So I may have strayed off your question.
No, not at all. I think that you hit it on the head, which is, this, you can't just, as we see these projects develop, people change control. They change control from notice to proceed to operations to down the road. And so, in your experience throughout the community relations world, what is the best way to establish, that core net of communication? Then how do you maintain it? And what happens if you don't?
Yeah. Well, it's crucial. And at the end of the day, what we're seeing in various states across the country is the notion that we're hyper focused on energy right now and electrons, but at the end of the day, it's really an economic development tool, right? And I think it's so important that companies, communities, landowners, everyone involved in that stakeholder process understand the bigger picture, the macro implications of what it means to have a wind facility or a solar facility in your community. And at the end of the day, it was already mentioned, these are landowner lease payments. At my time at Farm Bureau, I can tell you it's hard to make a living in agriculture. And Oklahoma and Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, here we are in ag country. It's hard to make a living with commodity volatility and everything else. And so those lease payments are important, absolutely. I joke that there's a lot of King Ranch pickup trucks being bought with wind money across the region. Eventually, it may be an electric Ford F-150, I have no idea. But it's also the revenue generated by these projects. If you look in most rural counties, a wind facility or a utility-scale solar facility is going to be probably one of the top capital investments in that county. And so in many cases, it becomes one of the revenue generators for your local municipalities, your local school districts. But beyond that even, and I think that the states that are understanding this and honing in on it and using it to their advantage are really accelerating, is this from a macro level, this is what companies are looking for, is renewable energy. And so states are using the diversification of their energy portfolio as a recruiting tool. How do I get that advanced manufacturing facility? How do I get that data center to locate in our state? And the states that are really figuring that out are starting to see that ancillary economy develop around wind and solar and the deployment of clean energy. And I think that's the broader, that we're all in this together, but at the end of the day, regardless of whether it's Lancaster County, there's a bigger picture here. And I think the better that companies and all the stakeholders are communicating that bigger picture is going to be more beneficial, not just for the local community, but also the state as a whole.
Well, yeah, and you hit on, actually, you segued right into my next question, which is going to be, for the longest time, we had a lot of public driver for this. It was public policy, it was renewable standards, it was, this is how we're moving forward because we've decided as a greater good it's the way to go. But as we continue to progress, are you starting to see more of a private driver? Where does the private sector come into play and the demand and also maybe the infrastructure?
Yeah, no doubt that now you see this. It's no longer a trend. I think there was probably a decade in which there was some, this may just be a fad, right? Is this really going to take off? We're well beyond that point. You know, at the end of the day, especially in wind, we've seen costs come down to the extent that it's cost competitive even without favorable economic policy drivers out of D.C. or the state level. I mean, we've seen that cost curve come down so significantly. You're going to see that with solar as well to be cost competitive. And so we see the market is continuing to drive this conversation. I think you see more corporations now across the country that, for whatever the reason might be, and I think it varies depending on company to company, that they're making statements that, look, we want to source cleaner power. We want to buy the electrons that are generated from cleaner sources. And so they've made ambitious goals to procure certain amounts of renewables, if not 100% of their power demand from renewables. That's not going away. That's just accelerating. I think you also have some additional pressure from within for a lot of companies that maybe have not taken that step, from shareholders, to where they're saying, look, we want you to make public our ESG goals. Where are we headed? As a company, are we going to be sustainable long term, and what does that look like? And so there's a lot of pressure on corporations right now, and that was already in existence, but it's already accelerating. And then I think you juxtapose that with the intersection of policy and what you're seeing right now coming out of D.C. Governments do play a role, no doubt. Local government, state government, and the federal government no doubt plays a role in whether an industry accelerates or decelerates, depending on where we're going. But right now, coupled with the private sector going where it is, paired that with policy decisions, I think you're going to see an acceleration over this decade and beyond. All
right, so we've got policy drivers, the government likes it, private sector likes it. What's the problem? Are we becoming, is there a hiccup? What about, we talked about Winter Storm Uri, we talked about, are we becoming, too reliable and unreliable, I believe was what you said the other day when we were having our conversation about things to talk about. And, what are the hurdles from either a tech or otherwise that we need to really address and focus on as we move forward?
So hats off to anyone in the room from SPP. I don't know if there are, but I'm sure there are. So hats off to Southwest Power Pool. I think until February's winter storm, at least in my experience in the policy arena, the general public and most of our state elected officials had no idea what SPP or Southwest Power Pool was. And so I think it really brought forth to, wait a second, hang on, this matters. Where am I? When I flip on this light switch, we expect the lights to come on. And I think the winter storm brought the general public, and especially state legislatures in this region, to the emphasis, wait a second, we really need to pay attention on what's going on in the energy markets and the power markets. With that being said, SPP has a very diverse portfolio. I mean, if you look at 2020 generation numbers across the footprint, you've got, roughly 31% coal, 31% wind, 26% gas. So it is a very diverse mix of resources. And overall, the region did extremely well. Yes, there was a few, localized outages, but ultimately the system held up well. But moving forward, I do think that we're in this time period where with each new project, whether it's wind or solar, you're going to hear the words energy storage with that. And the truth be told, at the moment, we are not at a situation to where you don't have to have other resources involved. And so when you hear, hey, we need to be 100% clean, renewable electricity, the reality is that's not where we are today. And it may be where we get, but today we're not there. And so I think when we talk about it, it's, yes, moving forward, you're going to see, more, investment in wind and solar, but you're going to see that paired with energy storage. And I think that technology in and of itself over the next decade, 2 decades, is going to change dramatically as well as we see scalability and brought online. We'll find more efficiencies. But you've got to have natural gas, and you've got to have other resources in the mix right now to combat that type of storm. And, it's interesting, and we fared much better than our dear friends to the far south in Texas, where you had a cascading event of water freezing off nuclear plant, coal plants tripping offline because of the frozen coal out front and not going through the furnace and the proper, I'm not a coal expert. You had frozen wind, you had frozen wellheads, And so at the end of the day, state by state and as a nation, if we're going to continue to see these outbreaks of extreme weather events, we've got to prepare. And the grid of today is not the grid of tomorrow. We're going to continue to see it evolve and change. But for right now, I would suggest SPP's in a really good spot. And we're going to, I think, each of these states will continue to be thoughtful as they think about policy around how do we continue to evolve, bring on more clean energy. But at the same time, we've got to make sure that the lights are on when we need them on, right?
Oh, it makes sense. Well, kind of getting onto that, the grid side of things. Okay, so we've got, our grid is changing. We have other pieces of it. What do you see as far as technologies or maybe things that are out there on the future development horizon that maybe disrupt either the grid or something that's new on the outside? I know we've had a lot of discussions of microgrids recently. Where do those fit? Peaker facilities that are renewable based, maybe even the crypto side of the world.
Right. At the end of the day, it's an exciting time. And back to our initial conversation around infrastructure, the infrastructure bill, one piece of that I think is kind of interesting and could bear some nice fruit is the Office of Clean Energy, I'm going to mess up, demonstrations. The Office of Clean Energy Demonstration, which is going to have billions of dollars of funding, but basically getting new emerging technologies, for instance, hydrogen being one of those, and basically bringing to bear that gap that exists between how do we take this new technology, but yet have the scale and demonstration that we can attract capital investment. It's the chicken and the egg, and I think right now with that particular office and that funding, they're trying to solve that problem of how do we bring along new technologies quicker and get them into the marketplace. So I think we're going to see a lot of change with battery storage and energy storage solutions as a whole. In Oklahoma, we've been on the cusp of talking hydrogen, both blue and green, and I think this region is well positioned to take advantage of what comes out of that industry potentially growing and flourishing. So, to your point, I think we're going to see a lot that changes, and hopefully we can see this intersection of, policy drivers helping the private sector, bring those to bear quicker to market. I think it's an exciting time.
Do you see any conflict or potential conflict between what you would, call the traditional use development of a renewable and some of these other uses? Again, we're seeing, I believe that the statistic I saw the other day was the cryptocurrency side of the world right now is using 1/2% of all global energy. I think that's more than the state of Washington, and that's everywhere. You're seeing power plants that are being purchased flat out, not for utility, not for sale, not for retail, but just to feed one or two people, or I should say industries. Right. Do you see those uses with, what we're doing from a development, and is it going to impact us as a network, as a grid, or is it going to foster maybe some healthy competition between the two uses?
Well, you would hope it fosters healthy competition. And, I think even in the crypto world, we started talking, I think it was Elon Musk, not that he tweets a lot, but I believe there was a tweet earlier in the year, talking about the pushback on, here's this large, demand for power to mine crypto, and then where's that power being sourced from? Right, is it coal facilities, whatever it is, and Elon, started tweeting about, we need to source it from renewable power, and so it's going to be interesting to see how new industries like crypto, how they evolve and they grow and they mature, and then how the power markets meet that growing demand for very, large, intensive, power supply. So, hopefully that conflict creates more opportunity and spurs new technology and growth and innovation, and I think it will.
Well, and you made a comment when we first spoke, again, last week, talking about things about this, that projects need to be legacy projects. That this is a way to approach something and develop something in a legacy way. And we've got a room full of people here that really do represent about every aspect of renewables. I mean, from cradle to grave, and maybe then some on top of wherever that would be. Could you explain a little bit more about what you view a legacy project to look like, a legacy development, and advice for the folks in this room about how maybe they could go about their day-to-day in a way that either gels with their colleagues sitting around them, or again, avoid pitfalls that maybe some of us have already fallen into?
Broad question, so I'll do my best to answer it. Well, I think at the end of the day, this room and the leadership that's in this room is indicative to how things need to operate. we're in the midst of a massive transition. And sometimes I don't even call it a transition, it's just an expansion, because in reality, the energy sector has always been in transition. And I think we're going to continue to see evolutions of new technologies and innovations emerge. And I think ultimately, companies, developers, communities, utilities, legislatures, you name it, there's got to be healthy, robust conversations that go on about, what's next? And how do we do what we do better? How do we learn? I'll give you an example. I think in the wind industry, as you see legacy or older projects, they're going to get, most are already getting repowered, right? I mean, if I built a wind farm in 2005, most certainly those wind facilities are already getting retooled, repowered with new upgraded technology to become more efficient. Well, the next question would be, well, when you decommission, and repower or retool a facility, what do you do with the old machinery, right? What do you do with the blades? What do you do with those components? And you're already seeing innovation within industry to solve somewhat of a problem, right? I mean, do you want to put blades in landfills, right? That's a public pushback. If you're not a renewable fan, it's like, well, wait a second, how green is it if it's not green all the way through from manufacturing to the end of life? And so those are solutions that the industry is looking towards, but I think it's also important that thought leaders and policy leaders are thinking ahead of how do we ensure that as this market continues to change, how do we do what we do better, and how do we look for innovations and new opportunities in the future? And I think, it's just collaboration. It really is. And I think from a political standpoint, we have to do a better job, and this is not unique to energy, but we have to do a better job of, it's not right, it's not left, it's the United States. We're all in this thing together, and let's find a little bit more, center, if you will, and instead of the echo chambers that exist in Twitter and Facebook and everywhere else. I think it'll be a much healthier dialogue from an energy transition standpoint if we're all having collaborative and thoughtful conversations.
Awesome. Well, we've got a little bit of time left, and we wanted to leave it open for questions that may be from the group or the audience. Otherwise, I've got one last one. It's not, there's always something up here. But we really did want to open it up. We wanted this to be more of a dialogue than anything else. Again, hitting these really high-level issues and then drilling down throughout the rest of the conference. And we'd love questions from the gallery.
Where are we seeing the new laws that would affect our industry? Is it in the Build Back Better package, or is it in the infrastructure package, or better?
It would be both. Yeah, most certainly. And I think, on the infrastructure package, I mean, if you think about it, layered on top of the nearly $2 trillion in pandemic relief, I mean, if you look at the American Rescue Act, states are getting flooded with federal funding right now with ARPA. And then you compound that with, $1.2 trillion in this infrastructure package. I mean, really the challenge for everyone in this room and states across the country is like, how do we tap into it? What's the process in which we can take advantage of what's coming out of D.C. to the fullest extent? Is because it's going to be a healthy competition. The Build Back Better also has some massive climate provisions, or at least the drafts that we've seen floating around. We'll see. I'm not as bullish on that package coming out as from what we're hearing today. I'm not as bullish as seeing that passed. I think you're already seeing kind of the backlash a little bit on the Republican side that, quote unquote, they allowed the Democrats to get this infrastructure deal done. So there is some pushback, I think, on the Republican side, and most certainly there's going to be some robust and healthy debates on what the Congressional Budget Office comes out with as far as scoring that legislation. But yes, both. The infrastructure bill has a lot of unique opportunities, I think, that the clean energy industry can tap into. And then the Build Back Better plan would also have some massive provisions for climate and addressing climate change. And so if that too were to pass, it would just be exponential amounts of money on top of the money already spent.
I think we got enough for one more. So.
What's in the infrastructure bill with respect to helping permit
interstate transmission and eminent domain in critical transmission corridors.
I don't know specifics tied to transmission with the exception of dollar amounts right now. And then I think there is a robust conversation about how to, house within federal government kind of, what am I trying to get at? Formalizing looking at transmission holistically across the country. I think you're going to see more details roll out of that. But right now, from a funding standpoint, I think the $46 billion towards transmission infrastructure. And so we'll see more of the details on what's in that language, the 2,000-page plus bill, that I've not come through all 2,000 pages yet. But
I think that's about our time. So we really, really appreciate it, Mark. It's a great insight. And again, your time and welcome to Nebraska.
Thanks. Appreciate it, guys. Thanks.